Hi, everybody. I'm Liz Maroney. I'm a PGY4 resident at the University of Pittsburgh. Currently applying to fellowship in microsurgery. I'm part of the competency-based curriculum, so I'm actually graduating after 5 clinical years. So I matched back in like 2018. Sometimes it seems like a lifetime ago. Sometimes it seems like yesterday. So I, vividly remember my experience. I remember, the weeks leading up to the match being very anxious, and I'm a baseline a pretty confident person. I felt like I was a pretty decent applicant, but I really feel for you guys. This process is very humbling. So I remember going into match Monday, not knowing what was going to happen. So I think I applaud all of you for being here and for kind of getting information. I think the best thing you can do going into that day is to just have a game plan. Hopefully you don't have to use it, but I think it's best to be prepared. So happy to be here tonight and help answer any questions.
Thanks, Liz. Yes, it's definitely very humbling if you think about and we reflect back on our process. So my name is Erica Sears. I'm an associate professor at the University of Michigan, and I primarily, my clinical practice is primarily within hand surgery. I practice also at the Ann Arbor VA, and this is my 8th year in practice now, and my 3rd year serving as the associate program director for our residency program. And yes, I do vividly also remember match day, and many times when we're reviewing applications, I think many of the faculty and residents in the room think like every year it seems to get tougher and tougher. And many of us will say, oh man, I don't know if I would match, compared to the standard many years ago. So it's definitely getting harder and harder. And I do think the goalpost keeps moving, but hopefully we will all get there one way or another, and just realize that there are many roads to achieving your aspirations and your goals. So do you have some best advice on options to consider if any of our students here receive the news that they didn't secure a spot next Monday?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that plastic surgery, just like there are many different ways to reconstruct a wound or a defect after cancer or trauma surgery, there's a lot of different ways to get to plastic surgery. So it's important to think to yourself and realize this may have not been the news I wanted. I was hoping for the straight shot integrated, but there's other ways to get to plastic surgery. You could elect to secure a general surgery spot and then complete general surgery residency, and then apply as an independent pathway to plastic surgery, which we have at Pitt. And there's a number of institutions that still have kind of the more traditional 3-year quote unquote fellowship training after general surgery residency. You could also elect to just do what's just called a transitional year or a preliminary year or an internship at a hospital in surgery, and use that as your first year of residency and reapply to match at that point. And then the third pathway is you could elect to hold off on starting residency, be it internship in another specialty or in general surgery, and then apply again the next year, and elect instead to do dedicated year or more to research. An important I think thing to think about with regard to research is that I don't think is actually talked about very much, but I think is, as a student, incredibly important. I mean, I had loans in medical school. No one really talked about the financial ramifications of taking a research year. They are real, and there are different. If you have loans, there are different policies and procedures that you need to, and hoops you need to jump through with regard to loan repayment and going into, forbearance, or just making sure that you don't get stuck holding the bag for a lot of money based on whether or not you graduate from medical school or not in that year. So make sure if you're interested in going to research as your plan B. I mean, obviously, at the ACAPS meeting this past this last weekend, 2 weeks ago, we looked at some of the statistics, and the average number of publications for plastic surgery residents was astounding. Like truly, I think, again, hats off to all of you for really working super hard. But I think we're getting into what's called, in my mind, it's a little bit of like a Red Queen hypothesis, where everybody is just like churning stuff out to be at the level playing field. To have 28 publications going into residency, like, is more than I have probably. So if you're interested in going into research, it's amazing. It's really important to move especially forward, but you need to make sure that it's the right decision for you. And that means thinking about the financial piece too. So talk to your financial aid officers, or, people at your school that have knowledge and kind of the different ways to go about this. And they may advise you to stay on as a medical student, defer your graduation a year, and do research at that point. They may advise you to go ahead and get that MD, graduate, and then become a fellow researcher. And it's going to be like a case-by-case basis. But something that I wanted to make sure I mentioned to you all, because, I think we take for granted, especially at big institutions like Michigan and Pitt, that we have a ton of students that are interested in research, but we do understand it's a big sacrifice for you guys.
Yeah, you bring up so many good points. I think one is the average number of papers that applicants have. And I do think it's important to remember that it's an average, right? And that means that it's a bell curve, and that there's some who match, many who match with less, and some who even match with more. And I can't even believe that standard these days is just really, it's just astounding. I don't have a better word to describe it. I think the number of papers I had was maybe 3 or 4. And I didn't give you my background, but I went to medical school at Michigan, and I matched at residency at Michigan. And I hope many programs, I can't speak for all programs, I can only speak for the program I have experience in, but really take into account what is your environment, right? With how the opportunities that you are going to have. But that's a different topic in terms of evaluating applicants, and we're here to talk to you about your other options if you don't match. And so for those of you who have joined us after we gave our introductions, that's what we're talking about. And please leave your questions that we can answer, or discussion topics in the question button, or we can try to follow them also on the comments. But a couple other points that you brought up are the different options and how to decide really what is the best option for you. I think, as Dr. Maroney mentioned, it's really a case-by-case basis. And I think if you do get the news that you haven't matched, it's really important. The SOAP process, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but it's a supplemental, let me make sure I get the acronym right, Supplemental Offered Acceptance Program, where you have open spots that applicants who are unmatched and eligible to apply for those spots throughout the week, you apply for, and you try to get them. And so the question is, first, are there any plastic surgery open spots? Many years there are not, but the most important thing is to not go at it alone, and reach out to your mentors and your medical school administration on Monday to help you with the process and to advocate for you. And so that's the first thing. And then the second thing I think is having someone who has access to your full application, and that is mentors, plastic surgeons, other people at your institution who can give you an honest assessment about what some of those weaknesses may be, because you want to know how you can improve. Like, do you want to take a preliminary spot? Do you want to try to go through the SOAP process? Do you want to try to take time off to do research? I think that decision point ultimately is based on maybe what went wrong in your application. Sometimes, it's a 70-some% match rate in plastic surgery. So you also could have been a very strong applicant and just very unlucky. So I think it's trying to get an honest assessment of how you potentially could improve your application to know what route to go in terms of those other options. We have a question here in the chat that says, what happens if there are no open spots? So first is that I'm assuming that means no plastic surgery spots. In many cases that is, or many years that is the case, that there are no open plastic surgery spots. And so one of the other options that Dr. Maroney mentioned is going into a preliminary surgery spot. And so oftentimes that is one of the options that students pursue. And ultimately the hope would be, if you do a preliminary spot, there's many trajectories from there. You could reapply to the plastic surgery match while you are a preliminary resident. You could hope that they take you at that program as a categorical general surgery resident and then try to pursue plastic surgery through the independent route after general surgery training. Or you could decide not to do the SOAP process and do research time, as Dr. Maroney mentioned. I think it's also a very important point that she mentioned, which is you can decide if this is an option at your medical school to stay a student and not graduate, or graduate and do research time. One thing to consider is whatever you're trying to improve in your application, whether you truly have time to do that before the applications go in if you're going to reapply in the fall. That's a very short time. For example, if you're going to do research to improve with your number of publications, for example, or even if you're doing a preliminary year, to have exposure and experience on a plastic surgery elective, if that program is supportive of that, and then to get letters. And so that's the big challenge, I think, in applying right away, to mention and to think about. But the one benefit I would say of staying a student is that you have potentially the opportunity, and again, this is institution by institution, of doing sub-Is and aways, and to further build relationships. So you can't, I can't underestimate how important it is to have the support of your medical school, because often many times if you graduate, you can't do sub-Is anymore. You can't do the aways like you can if you're still a student. And so it's hard to improve your application if it's a grade situation or a letter of recommendation situation that is necessary to improve your application if you are no longer a student. And I've seen that challenge that some students have faced if they've graduated.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Dr. Sears. I didn't think about that, but that's, I think that plastic surgery is a very small field. A lot of our mentors all know each other. And especially now in the wake of COVID, having less and less in-person encounters. At Pitt, we still do virtual interviews. I mean, most programs did virtual interviews this year. It's really, really advantageous to be a known entity to a program. You've rotated there. You have some sort of connection there. So I think that to your point, Dr. Sears, like being able to utilize a year where you're able to do additional sub-Is is absolutely essential if you can swing it. In that vein, Dr. Sears, I wanted to ask you a question. With regard to research, if a student was going to take a year and dedicate that to research time, remaining a student, would you recommend, and this is kind of a strange question, but would you recommend them staying at their home institution or trying to go somewhere else to try to build that network? Does it matter? Just love to hear your 2 cents.
Yeah, I mean, I know my perspective is I'm thinking of a student at my institution, I'd say stay. I think it depends where you feel you have the most support, and support of faculty who can help you in plastic surgery. So if you come from a program or a school that where you don't feel that you have a lot of support and opportunities to get to know individuals in plastic surgery who are going to advocate for you, then I think it makes sense if you have the opportunity to go to a different institution where you feel better supported. So I think that's the most important thing, right? Where are you going to build relationships? Where are mentors going to advocate for you? And I mean, the financial piece also is that Dr. Maroney mentioned is really important. And obviously I know you're going to do what you have to do to ultimately have the future that you want, but the financial implications are really real. So one is, whether if you're still a student, whether or not you have access to student loan support or other financial means to even just live and pay your rent and have food for the year. Some of the research positions pay and some don't. I think each institution is different, whether or not they are just going to say, yeah, we're going to only charge you tuition for 4 years, even if it's extended. So hopefully that's not the case, and I can't speak for what each institution does, but it's definitely something to consider and think about, and talk to your individual medical schools about what those financial implications are.
Mm-hmm. So at this point, we're kind of talking about the theme of reapplying. So you're going to do your research, or do a transitional year and then reapply to the plastic surgery match. One thing that I think is important to mention, again, I was at this ACAPS meeting, which has a lot of program directors and program leadership from programs around the country, and it was really interesting. They had us go through as an exercise mock applications, and one of the applications was a reapplicant. And one of the themes that was really apparent to me was the importance of a reapplicant addressing the root cause analysis as to why they didn't match, and addressing those issues, and not kind of glossing over it or pretending it didn't happen. Like, this is real, this happened. In surgery, it's the same thing. There's a complication, I managed it, and now I'm moving forward. Try to do the same thing in your application. I didn't match the first time. I think this is why, based on my conversations with my mentors, and really looking at myself in the mirror honestly, and this is what I did this past year to address those deficiencies. And I think somebody in the room mentioned, if you don't do that as an applicant, it's going to happen. That conversation is going to happen without you. And your application, your personal statement, your interviews the next year are your opportunity to face those head on, and really use that as, an opportunity to showcase your maturity and your ability to overcome adversity, and actually, be honest with yourself and make positive steps. And I think as a surgical trainee, those themes are important for surgical training. So I think that if you can adequately address those things, don't be afraid to apply again. But again, you have to be very, cognizant of what went wrong, and really fix those deficiencies in the next cycle.
That's excellent advice. Addressing really the reflection head on, and just telling the story that you want told, rather than having us guess and kind of making up a story on our own. So you don't want that. So I completely agree. You want to say what you've learned, say how you've reflected, and what you've changed. And I think that goes a long way for sure.
And then, additionally, presumably, if you entered into the match this year and get bad news on Monday, I would assume that means that you didn't probably apply to the general surgery match as like a backup, or it's called dual applying. Dr. Sears, do you have any advice on dual applying, especially in the kind of context of a reapplicant?
So the next time around, whether or not an applicant should apply to plastic surgery and general surgery both. I think there's no harm in it, right? I think it's also important to realize that general surgery is also getting very competitive. And so, like way back in the day, I feel like it was a safer backup plan than it is now. So just knowing that, and I think you should also apply to a wide variety of programs in terms of, potentially different practice settings, if you want to give yourself the best chance. I'm just thinking about, okay, maybe you don't want to only apply to powerhouse like tertiary care university settings. So you might, if you truly are okay going the route of general surgery first, that you may apply to a range of types of general surgery programs. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I was going to say. Yeah.
I think that's an important point with away rotations as well. It's kind of like backtracking to what we were talking about. If you, the first time around, had a very, specific sort of program that you were rotating at and it didn't work out, be more open-minded as to the practice patterns, or, areas of the country, quote unquote prestige of the institution. At the end of the day, any ACGME certified plastic surgery program is going to teach you how to be a good plastic surgeon. So, you kind of need to keep your ego in check. And I mean, I applied to every program when I applied because I was so risk averse, and didn't want to, as I was chipping away at the institutions kind of on my application, I thought, well, what if I only get 13? What if I only get 5 interviews and they're the 5 places that I cut off? So, just try to be open-minded and say like, I'm willing to live in XYZ place, or, go to XYZ institution for 6 years. And if that's going to get me where I want to be and become a plastic surgeon, if that's your end goal, and you got to kind of like, make some concessions to get here, we all have, in whatever way, we have needed to. But I think it's important to think about how much you're willing to really sacrifice. And some people will say like, oh, you know what? I don't want to live in XYZ place. Like I want to be at one of these 5 institutions, and that's okay. That's an okay decision to make, but it may mean that you need to get to plastic surgery in a different route, or it may mean that another specialty might be better for you, which is okay too. At the end of the day, like, we go through so much in medical school trying to self-actualize. I remember one of my mentors, who's actually a general surgeon, when I was kind of going through the process of, I found plastic surgery pretty late in medical school, so like 3rd year. So went through the whole like, oh no, like I've done 0 research, like I don't know how to make this happen. So I was really I was very concerned. But I remember talking to my mentor, and she said, Liz, the biggest joke that we play on medical students as, a community in medicine is that there's only one specialty that's going to make you happy, because that's so far from the truth. At the end of the day, there is a lot of overlap, especially with plastic surgery. We overlap with every other specialty. There's a lot of overlap between specialties, and there's likely 4 or 5 subspecialties in medicine, or maybe even more, that are going to make you happy if you are a happy person. So, at the end of the day, plastic surgery is a great career. If I could do it again, I would. But you have to kind of be honest with yourself and say like, is this the only thing that's going to make me happy? And if the answer is no, then that's perfectly okay.
Yeah, that's great perspective, great advice from your mentor. So the other question is there may be related to that topic, if you find yourself not matching on Monday and you get a list of all of the open programs or the list of unfilled positions, is to think about what programs that you're preparing your application for. Like I said, I think the most common, if assuming there's no open plastic surgery positions, if there are, apply for them, is what kind of preliminary general surgery positions would you consider, and in what places? Do you have any advice on for that, Dr. Marani?
I think going into Match Monday, it's an emotional day, whether you get good news or bad news. So just be prepared for that and have a plan. I can't really underscore that enough. I think that my colleagues that found themselves in the situation where they were soaping, those that had a plan were much more successful than those that did not have a plan. And by have a plan, I mean, look in the mirror and decide theoretically, if I don't match on Monday, what am I going to do a research year? Am I going to try to get into a gen surg spot? Am I going to try to find something else? Or am I going to, take some time and reapply? And whatever decision you come to, just be at peace with that. And then that way, if you get the news that you didn't match on Monday, at least that first step is done. And you're like, this is what I need to pursue. Don't be embarrassed. This happens every year. Folks that are, like Dr. Sear said, with the match rate at 70%, 30% of very qualified candidates that are probably the top of their medical schools and have, research and, volunteer work, all the things that we look for, just get unlucky. And unfortunately, with our, ACGME approved spots, there's not enough for all the amazing candidates that apply to plastic surgery. So don't be embarrassed. It happens. And don't sit in your room with the lights off all day. Like, get out, go to your school, you know, find your point person, if it's your advisor, your mentor, your dean, you know, understand the process and just find someone that's going to help shepherd you through it and be aggressive. And by that, I mean, look at the list, you know, cold call programs, really put, at the end of this, you should have used up every ounce of professional capital that you have secured so far as a medical student. Like, leave nothing unturned, because you want to really be, you know, everyone else in the country that is soaping is doing the same thing. So you really need to be, you know, ready to make a decision and secure a spot if you're trying to go that route.
Great advice. A couple of reminders in terms of the SOAP process. And again, go with what your administration and medical school tells you, because I think it's a whole involved process and it does move very fast. And as Dr. Maroney said, you have to be very aggressive on Monday, being ready to pursue that process if that's the route you're going to go. A couple of reminders: you are not allowed to contact programs until they contact you. So that's one important thing to remember. And also, people, mentors, your medical school administration are also not allowed to contact programs until they contact you. So that's one important reminder.
I didn't know
once
that.
You get the list of programs. Yeah, I just some of the tips. So there's on the NRMP's website, there's like a 6-minute video on the process. So go watch that. It kind of gives you an overview of what to expect and what the timeline is. They start accepting applications on Tuesday. And my understanding is that the first applications in are the first the programs see. So you want to get them in early, so that yours are the first, or yours is the first that they see in the early batch. And then on Thursday is when the offers start going up. I think the interviews happen between Tuesday, Wednesday, I think. But your medical school will usher you through that process. But there are, I think, 4 waves of in 2-hour blocks of offers, and then you have to decide if you get an offer whether to take it or not. And so that's sort of like a high level of the process. But again, I think that one of the most important things is that you're not supposed to and not allowed to contact programs until they contact you first.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, no problem. So again, we're talking about Plan B. What happens if on Monday you hear the news that you don't match? And we would love to take your questions either in the comment box or the question feature. Do you only get one offer? You know, I don't know the answer to that. I don't think so. I think you can get multiple offers. It's not the match. It's not the same algorithm as the match. So yeah.
Yeah, you can get multiple offers, but there's usually a time associated with, like, you need to get back to us by, because remember, these programs went unmatched. They're kind of in the same situation as you are, where they have empty spots that they have to fill. So, or, you know, would really benefit from filling. So not to say that anyone has a power position, because I think that everyone's trying to have a mutual goal of getting people in spots. But, you know, keep in mind that if there's, you know, 5 other people's applications that are coming across people's desks that are equally qualified, they'll probably take the person that says yes first.
And thank you, Justin Galvis clarified also, or verified, that you can get multiple offers.
Great.
And so we have a question. What is your opinion on surgery prelim versus a research fellowship? So I have my opinion on that. We'll see what Dr. Maroney's opinion is also. I think, and she mentioned that that's kind of the decision point you're deciding on Monday, right? Is my plan research, or is my plan a preliminary year? Most likely, but maybe not. It could be categorical general surgery, it could be plastic surgery, but the SOAP process, or the scramble process, which is all after the SOAP process is done. If there's still open spots, then it's kind of a free-for-all. That's the quote-unquote scramble. So I think it depends on what aspect of your application it is that you need to improve, right? Or if you just say, hey, I need to get to work, I don't have the money to do research, I think that's, you go down the prelim route of taking a position. I think if your issue is grades, clinical performance, then I think for sure you should go to do the prelim spot, because you really need to prove yourself and show that you can be very clinically strong as a resident. And then I think many times, if you have very strong letters about how great of an intern you are, that some of those weaknesses, if it's related to grades and clinical performance in medical school, can be overlooked and improved upon. So I think if that's the issue that hurt you potentially as an applicant, then I would say you should go the prelim route. If you have a lot of papers and a lot of research experience but still went unmatched, I don't know that a research year is going to help you, unless there's just something else going on there. And so I think for me, those are the major decision points. If it's a lack of research and you want to improve your application, I still think just quickly reapplying in the fall is not a wise idea. I think you potentially may need to do 2 years to truly strengthen your application. What do you think, Liz?
Yeah, I mean, to your end point, I totally agree. I think, unfortunately, just having taken a research year myself in residency, I've realized the true benefit of the research year in terms of just publications and presentations is really realized after your year is kind of over, because you put in all the work and now you're presenting all the work that you've done. So know that if you're going to take a research year, it's probably a long game, because there's very little probability that you're going to have, if research was your quote unquote like problem, or the reason the reason that you believe you didn't match, it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to achieve the number of publications to really move the needle on that number in just a couple months. Because really, that's, if you think about the timeline of the application, that would be a couple months. So again, like, research year is kind of like the long game of like maybe 2 years from now I'll be applying. But to kind of go back to what is the best route for you, again, I think it's a really individual decision, but it comes down to why. So why you didn't match, where you are in school, and then who you are. So why, if you believe that you didn't match because your research numbers kind of weren't there, then I think going the research route is reasonable. If your research numbers are good, and you think you didn't match perhaps because of like Dr. Sears said, grades or clinical competency, then maybe jumping into an internship spot or a preliminary transitional year spot is a good way to address that head on. Number two, where you are, I think, is a really important factor here. And by that I mean where you are in medical school. If you're at an institution that has a lot of research support and is used to having research fellows and someone that are going to shepherd you through the process, and it's not something that you have to do de novo, meaning write all these IRBs, you can really hit the ground running. I think taking a research year is reasonable. A lot of those institutions also have funding, so they may be able to help you out, pay your bills and pay your med school loans while you're in that time. So I think that's an important thing to think about. And then number three, who you are. I think that's, this process, like I've said, multiple times on this call, is very humbling, and it really leads you to be very introspective and kind of understand what your strengths and weaknesses are as an individual, as an applicant, moving forward. And if you're the type of person that is better in person than they are on paper, meaning you show up early, you're really eager, you're like a go-getter, you're going to benefit from going into a preliminary spot, because your attendings and residents are going to see how motivated you are, and your letters are going to show that. And similarly, like away rotations and all those things are beneficial to those sort of people. If you're more introverted, or you just know that you don't make first impressions very well, maybe going into research is better for your application. You have to just know yourself and know how to play up your strengths. But I think most importantly, no matter which way you choose, the most important thing that you can do is articulate your choice when you reapply. And this, I did this. This was the decision I made because of XYZ. There is absolutely no harm or shame in saying, I went into a preliminary spot because I had to start making money because I'm 30 years old and I need a job. you need to be more, articulate than that, but don't feel like you're, I don't know. I obviously have very strong opinions on this, but don't go into financial ruin and set yourself up for a life of misery you if you can't. And I think that any program that is worth having, a great applicant is gonna see that and understand that not everyone has the same access and opportunities.
Definitely. I hope many programs recognize that. So we have a couple questions to answer. Uh-oh, we lost Dr. Maroney, but hopefully she'll come back. Somebody said, this may be thinking ahead too much, but what is the average number of interviews that a reapplicant could expect? Get Dr. Maroney back here. Oh, hey.
I'm back. Sorry.
She's back. So
I was
one
trying
of the questions,
to scroll through the questions,
yeah.
and I accidentally clicked on someone's profile and then went to their profile instead.
What is the average number of interviews that a reapplicant could expect? I don't know, I can't answer that with concrete data because I just haven't polled reapplicants to know. And I think it's so individualized on why the person didn't match and what the issue was and what support they had in terms of what that next, what that plan was, whether they, had a very supportive research lab and mentors who then really advocated for them versus if they did something really different and didn't help to improve the application. So it's really hard to say because it's so individualized. I would say many times it's probably less than the first time, but it just really depends. It's hard to answer that question. So the next question is, any insight on finding a plastic surgery position outside of the match when programs have expansion or attrition? And that is also a great question. And I would just say the best source that I know is the ACAPS website, where there is news or information on open positions. That get posted regularly, open residency positions, etc. Hey.
Did it again. I'm going to stop trying to look at the questions because I keep looking at random people's profiles because I'm clicking the wrong thing. So I'll just wait for you to tell us the questions, Dr. Sears.
No problem. So this question that I was answering was about how to find out about open plastic surgery positions, whether it's a residency program expansion or a departure of a resident. And the best resource I know is the ACAPS website, where those are posted. And so you can just go to the ACAPS job board. If you just Google ACAPS jobs, then you'll see the link to that, and it's updated regularly. But I think it's a really important point that Maheen brings up is, we've said there are many paths to plastic surgery, and taking an open position in a plastic surgery program, it's very hit or miss, but I think it's more common than we probably think collectively throughout the nation. There might be a few every year where that's the case. We have a new resident joining our program. But the thing is, it's the year that the opening is often very random. And typically you have to be in a program and an active resident, right? To join a program in their third year, if that's the opening, then you need to have completed 2-3 years, wherever the opening is going to be starting at. So usually those open spots are not for intern year usually, but I could be wrong if they're opening spots and they're not using the match for those intern year spots. But if they're second, third year positions, then those would be the residents, the individuals who did preliminary years and then went into categorical general surgery position would be the ones that are eligible for those open positions.
Yeah. But I think to that point, having if you end up going the general surgery route, hoping that at some point during your residency you can slide into a general or a plastic surgery opening. The ACAPS website is very helpful. It has those resources. The ACAPS Instagram posts open positions from time to time. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of these positions are filled through word of mouth, through, program director to program director, or, someone advocating for you when they find out there's an open spot. So if you end up, at a general surgery program, I think it's really important to find, if there's plastic surgery at your institution, find the plastic surgery program director and say, hey, I'm a general surgery resident, but I, initially applied to the plastic surgery match, and then my goal is to become a plastic surgeon. I'm either committed to going through general surgery residency and applying as an independent resident, or if there are any open spots that ever open up, like please, 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 like put my name out there, consider me. And they'll be your advocate. They're the ones that are going to be able to kind of guide you to those spots. So, no matter where you end up, it's really important to kind of make your intentions known and make those connections. That's really the theme, and trying to kind of build that community that's going to support you.
Excellent advice. Excellent. And I would say, building on that, so if you are, having multiple options for preliminary positions, if you're going through the SOAP process, you may want to think ahead about, what is the environment? What is the support if I still want to pursue plastic surgery at that institution? So you want to think about that ahead of time so that you can then take Dr. Maroney's advice when you get there. And you also have to come in with a mindset if you do take a preliminary spot. If like you are, and it's stressful, I'm sure it's very anxiety provoking, but essentially that you're in a year-long interview, right? Because the ultimate goal is that you're offered a categorical position at that institution. And so you just want to, be committed 100% and just show how awesome you are, how much of a team player you are, how well you take care of patients, how prepared you are. I mean, you just have to be the best of the best.
Yeah. And I think a great way to kind of truly shine in that situation is not only to clinically like show up, be prepared, be enthusiastic and excited to be there and eager to learn, but also at that institution, get involved with some research. The match is happening in March. If you are, soaping into position a prelim year, that's going to happen next week. You can email the program director or, the faculty at your new institution and say, hey, I'm coming in July. I only have, I have 1 year to, reapply, and I'm really excited to work with you. Do you have any research projects I can help out with? And really get involved and, show up. You don't have to physically, one of the, I guess, silver linings of COVID is it showed us all that you don't need to physically be at an institution yet to be productive for them. So I think it's a great way to kind of get your foot in the door and then, really hit the ground running.
Oh, we have another question. From a selection panel's point of view, what else would be the best substitute on paper for a sub-I or prelim year for the unmatched to demonstrate clinical experience in surgery or plastic surgery? Let's see. Do you have any ideas, Dr. Maroney?
I think, those are like sub-I versus prelim year are kind of the more traditional ways to show clinical competence. I guess you could, alternatively, if you had a plastic surgeon in your community and wanted to work with them for a year, you could reapply with a very strong letter from that one individual if you were, scrubbing with them, et cetera, and engaging in research with them. But that would be a little bit unconventional, not to say that that's bad. It would be unique. And I think that it would, if you had a really strong connection, it would be a great way to have someone vocally advocate for you. But I think that would be a little bit more of like a specialized situation.
Yeah, I think the sub-I and the prelim year are the most ideal because you are a part of the team, you're engaged, And I think that's how you can best demonstrate your clinical skills. Um, Now, if you've gone the route where you've graduated and you didn't do a prelim year, you did a research, you're no longer eligible for sub-Is or away internships, then, I think observerships are really the only other thing you can do. But you just can't practice clinically in most places. I mean, I think any place really, if you are not a student or a resident. So I think
Dr. C,
observership is really the only other option.
what do you think about in the case of a reapplicant? What do you think about that applicant doing sub-Is at the same institution that they did them the previous year? Yes, no, maybe. I don't know. What do you think? I have a thought. I'll let you answer first because you're more senior than I am.
I don't know. I have all the answers, but I think it's just so nuanced, right? With what the problem was. I mean, I think if something was really going on and maybe it was something was going on in your life and it really impacted your performance, and then that situation, it was resolved or improved, and that institution and faculty can see a huge difference and really be vocal about that difference, then I can see that being to your advantage, and really, I think, helpful in having the programs understand what happened. But I think if it's, those places where you maybe weren't supportive, they didn't write strong letters of recommendation for you, then maybe it's you need to try and broaden your network. So I think it's really like situational, and sometimes you may not know, like you can't see your letters of recommendation, you don't really know truly what was said in those letters, how about you. So I think it's also important to try to ask for honest feedback.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to say all the same things. Essentially, I think going through and doing the same, if you did 3 sub-Is the year prior, doing the same 3 sub-Is is, what do they say? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing and hoping for a different outcome. I would not advise that. I think that in the certain case where you want to go to that program and you want to show them that you improved or whatever, it's worth spending another month there to really iron out whatever deficiency or less than ideal attribute you brought, and address it and say listen, I'm committed, I want to come here, and this is why. And you can really sell and do a great job on the sub-I. In that case, I think it might be worth it. But overall, I think that it's probably a sign to broaden your horizon and then make a bigger network, like Dr. Sears said. I also, if I was to find myself in the situation about matching, I would probably have reached out to the institutions that I did aways at and just shot them an email and said hey, I rotated with you, I didn't match. Do you have any legit feedback for me? Because I'm going to do this again and I want to know how I can be better. And I think, if I was sitting on the other end of that email, I'd be very impressed that the student, reached out and was able to, use this as an opportunity to grow. And I would give them some legitimate, good feedback with points on, things that they could do to be better sub-I. And I think that would make you better the next time around.
I agree. Definitely agree. So we have about 5+ minutes left. If there are other questions, please drop them in the comments or the questions bubble so that we can answer your questions.
And I think just big themes are, it's going to be okay. If you don't match on Monday, it's not the end of the world. It's not the end of your career. It's not the end of your career in plastic surgery. There's many ways to get to become a plastic surgeon. I mean, it used to be non-traditional, right? The integrated route. So not all of them are the integrated route. There's a lot of ways to get here. And as long as you are honest with yourself and honest with your goals, and work hard, you can make it happen. So don't feel like this is a lot of doom and gloom of Monday's going to be the worst day of my life if I don't match. Like, it's going to be tough for sure. Like, I don't want to sugarcoat that. It's like a real kick in the teeth. But I think if you can overcome that, initial shock, that you can kind of rise above and keep on. So it's important to have good advisors, mentors. You guys are all doing, your due diligence and kind of seeking mentors from other institutions by going to these things. So kudos to all of you. You're going to be, hopefully very well suited in our specialty.
Excellent advice. And then just to also reiterate the high level points that you really should take from this is don't go it alone. So immediately start reaching out to your medical school administration who can support you, as well as any faculty, mentors, advisors. Do not go it alone. And we have a question. Does every student who takes a research year have to have 28 plus publications? The lab I will be working at is known to have only a few projects, but very high quality projects for each student. So yeah, I'd say the answer is no. I mean, we know from experience, 28 plus publications in a year means you probably weren't that involved on those. So I think having things that you're truly learning from, taking charge of, I think even a few is wonderful. You just really want to be able to speak about your involvement, the impact, what you've learned on interviews. And so I think high quality is important, but it's also important to make sure that you have product from those high quality projects, right?
Yeah, I think the numbers game that is now the research portion of your application is really what we're trying to elucidate in that is this person going to contribute to the specialty? And there's a lot of ways to contribute to the specialty in terms of research. One of them is by churning out a bunch of publications. The other way, like you alluded to, is coming up with having a question, answering the question, and going through all the steps that get you from A to B, like writing an IRB, getting grant funding, doing the actual development of your project and the data analysis and everything that comes with that. So I agree. I don't think you need, I think that the gold star is this medical student had a clinical interest that then they saw a project from inception to fruition with a publication, but it's honestly pretty rare that actually happens because it takes time, right? So I think it's okay if you don't have, and I didn't have 28 publications when I applied to residency. It's more about doing something that you actually care about. And, if you have a project or even like a volunteer experience that you're really passionate about, I think you can talk about that at interviews and really set yourself apart too. So don't sweat if you don't have the numbers, because it is like a numbers game. And I think we all recognize that at this point.
And just one other small piece of advice, if you find yourself doing that research year, is don't just do research. Ask to be invited or get on the list to know about teaching conferences, journal clubs. So you want to really integrate yourself in the plastic surgery section department, wherever you are. Hopefully that exists. Where you're doing research, even ask your mentors, can you come shadow in clinic? If they allow you to come shadow in the OR. So, this kind of relates to that question I mentioned, observership, but really, if you can't do the sub-Is and aways or not doing a prelim year, if you're doing research, you can still shadow and get to know the residents who hopefully will advocate for you. So really just be a part of the group in more ways than just doing research.
Any last minute burning questions from anybody?
Well, as we're waiting to see if there's any last minute questions, I would just recommend everyone take a breath and enjoy these days until you get the news on Monday. And even on Monday, no matter what, take a breath and just know that there again are many paths on our journey, many paths.
Yeah, and again, kudos to all of you for taking the time to do your due diligence and have get yourself armored in whatever way you have going into Monday. So I give you guys a lot of credit for everything you've done to get here, and in participating with this. And hopefully we've been able to give you some advice to have a plan.